Associate Professor Mike Grimshaw is, as I understand, a professor of sociology. And he has been teaching for a while, you would expect. Surprising, you have to be teaching for a while to become an associate professor, you have to be relatively good at your job. And he has noticed a decline in standards to the point where he has blown the whistle on what he says is a lack of literacy amongst students, a lack of ability even to construct a simple sentence and to be able to express themselves, and yet those people are getting degrees, devaluing the worth of academic qualifications in this country, and also seem to be begging for some assistance that they've got to that stage being unable to properly read and write. And Associate Professor Mike Grimshaw just now. Mike, lovely to have you on. I hope I've introduced this topic properly.
Yeah, it's a big topic that's really being addressed right across the Western world. We're seeing this in America, where students are coming to some of the top universities unable to read a book or unwilling to read a book. It's happening across England. It's not just a New Zealand issue. It's really a question about what do we want from a university system? What do we want from our education system? I want to stress the best students are as good as ever, and that's something that we need to remember. What's really happening is students are coming through the school system, entering university with what I call functional illiteracy, and I've got to be clear what I mean by that. They lack the ability to read and write, to think to the level that you would traditionally expect someone entering university to have. And this comes from a wide variety of schools. So it's not just the lower decile schools. We have students coming from some of the top schools, some of the students coming from private schools are coming in with these issues as well. And so it's a wider societal issue that I think starts right the way back at primary school education. It flows through into intermediate, into high school education. And the concerning thing is that we are seeing those who have successfully navigated the education system, and they're arriving, many of them, without those skills that you would traditionally expect them to be able to have.
Can I take you back as to when you started? It's important because the reference you've also done is personal. So you said, I have noticed this personally in the stuff that I've seen that you've written. Can I take you back a bit, just quickly? You started teaching in academic or circles when? What year?
1997.
Okay, so 1997 is your first year. I was just to give you a bit of background. I was a university tutor tutoring medieval history at undergraduate level at Otago University in the early 80s. But even then, my university professors who were looking over my shoulder at my work were saying, we've noticed a decline in the things you've just talked about, particularly the ability for expressing in written language. And they were noticing a decline in the 80s. Now, you came in 97. When it was, so I guess your reference point is your first year teaching. How much worse has it got over the succeeding 25 years, Mike?
It has increased. I mean, I started at Otago in 1985, so I've been in the system a long time. What we are seeing is a specific increase in certain cohorts, and I think this is something to do with the increased number of students coming to university. I think there's the impact of COVID lockdown education. I think it's very much associated with the impact of social media and the inability to concentrate, the inability to focus, but also the frame of reference has shrunk quite considerably over the past few years in particular. And that's why I raise this issue. It's something that lots of academics talk about, but we're not very happy about talking about it publicly.
Why is that?
I think it's a concern about what will happen if we raise these issues, and we exist in a society which undervalues tertiary education. I would say it's a society which is often undervalued pre-tertiary education. We tend to undervalue our education system, and this is why we also underfund it. And we're not really sure what an education system's for. I mean, this started as a LinkedIn post. I just thought I'll get it out there.
Sure.
Put it out there, and an old-style journalist, Julie Jacobson from the Post, picked it up and ran with it, and suddenly I've become, in a sense, the person who's calling out the emperor's new clothes in many ways.
Well, and rightly so. But I'm amazed that you say many of your colleagues have noticed this as well. I assume they all have. It's something you talk about in the staff room, is it?
Informally, yeah. There really are no staff rooms anymore, but people talk about it in a variety of ways.
You don't have a staff club at Canterbury University anymore, Mike?
Oh, there's staff clubs, but a lot of people go and talk in a whole variety of ways. I've had great feedback from a lot of teachers have supported me, parents, employers, other academics as well. And it's really just saying we need to think seriously about what are we doing in our education system all the way through. Because if we are seeing those who are succeeding through NCEA, and many of these students are lacking those basic comprehension, literacy, critical thinking skills, and they are getting into university, well, there's an issue there. And so there's a number of issues. I think we should be university is not for everyone, and I totally believe in that, because we need to have more people being supported to do trades, we need to support polytechnics, we need to support a wide variety of employment options.
Well, going back to that point you're talking about, university is not for everyone, Mike. But it has been for everybody, hasn't it? It's been paraded as this is a desirable end for every student that goes to secondary school now. And indeed, there's even the Ministry of Education measuring a school's success, if that's what you would like to say, look at those who go on to tertiary study as a highlight of the highest percentage that you can coming out of your school. So obviously, in our compulsory education system, we see a tertiary education as a desirable outcome, yeah?
Well, that goes back to last century and the rise of the knowledge wave, which was the belief that if we had a higher education increase in our population, we would see an increase in our economy, would have a knowledge economy built on the back of a knowledge wave, would have a knowledge society, which would be a society that would demonstrate all the benefits of higher education as well as an economic outcome. Now, I'm not really sure if we've seen that. I'm struggling to see that we've seen an increase in productivity, an increase in the economy, an increase in social cohesion, an increase in an informed and engaged society. Now social media might be part of that, but I think it's really this big question of, well, what are we doing? We're putting something between 40 to 45,000 students graduating each year from within the New Zealand university system. 95% of those are undergraduates. Are we actually creating that number of jobs requiring a tertiary qualification? That's a big issue. Now, if we're not asking students to pay for their education, that might not be necessarily the same thing. But because we're actually asking students to take out student loans for their education, then we're getting a large number of students coming through who are not necessarily getting the education we might expect them to have because they're coming in with lacking the skills we might expect. We're doing a lot of remedial work within the universities, and then students are also not necessarily having to turn up in person to lectures. There's also now the increased use of AI, so there's a cumulative effect of a number of things we need to be able to deal with. And all I'm saying is, let's have a big conversation about this. We need to take these things seriously.
Well, we are a conversation pit ourselves, so we like to have these conversations. But the concerning thing is, here we are in 2024. As I said to you, that's why I asked, when do you start teaching? Because this has been noticed by universities and by university staff dating back to the 1980s at Otago University. When you started in 1985, they were moaning then about you as undergraduates not having the same intellectual abilities as your peers that came prior to you. Why are universities so reluctant to, in actual fact, address something that they know has been going on for decades?
Well, I think it's the underlying question of what is the purpose of a university and what's it for. I mean, I've been part of the editorial board for the University of Canterbury's 150th book. And a lot of that was discussing, well, what is the purpose and meaning of a university? And there's an ongoing question about that. In the 1950s, Robin Winks visited New Zealand as an American academic and said, well, there's a real issue with our tertiary education. He said back then, our pre-tertiary education was better than America, but our tertiary education was worse. John Pocock, the great New Zealand political theorist, was writing about do we have a society of mediocrity or meritocracy in New Zealand, in our universities and our education system. And he was arguing back then in 1960, we value mediocrity rather than meritocracy. I mean, these things keep on going. I mean,